Oh,
Oh, it's being recorded. It
it's official.
officially gave a little lady voice. This is being recorded. Anyway.
Yeah, I guess I'm just generally curious about some of the things you've learned talking to different people about things like the Lord of the Rings, and also some things you've talked about with Richard Rowland about like pagan understandings and how Christianity kind of preserved pagan culture even, and pagan motifs. And you were talking all about the different stave churches and such like as that.
Yeah, because Father Andrew and I just had that talk about the Christianity preserving those pagan things. Is that what you're?
Yeah, exactly. Because there's like so many examples of that in our culture, I feel, and it's an amazing thing that like so much of previous culture was preserved through the lens of Christian storytelling and of Christian scribes like the monks and different people like that, who were kind of remembering olden ways, but like bringing those olden ways up into their story. And I think you were really curious in particular around like where is that just idolatry and olden ways being preserved? Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I know. That's the thing is what, how do we know what to preserve when? And that's why I gave the example of like the youths of in Babylon, like Daniel and the other three, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were fine to take the pagan names which venerated or said good things about the other gods, of Babylon. They all meant something to do with like Belshazzar, right? That's Daniel's name was that, like they gave him that name. Is it Belshazzar or Belteshazzar? There's too many Baal somethings, but it was all to praise Baal, right? And yet they didn't say we will not answer to these names, but they didn't eat the foods. So there's something about consuming the food that showed agreement when the name didn't, and I brought that up with Father Andrew, but I don't remember what he said. See that video if anyone's interested. Yeah, let's pretend I did that on purpose to get people to go look at that.
No, it's a really good conversation.
Yeah. But I think that I'm just listening actually to Richard Rowland and Jonathan Pajot talk about the 9. What is the name? The 9 worthies. The 9 worthies. And
what are those?
The 9 worthies. You don't know?
No, I don't know.
So obvious. No. I didn't know. I actually did. That's not true. I knew about them because I've read The Discarded Image by C.S. Lewis, but I didn't recall it until like, oh right, I think he mentioned that. So I guess it was 3 pagans, 3 Jews, and then 3 Christians. And the pagans were Hector from Troy.
Yeah.
And then Alexander the Great, and then Julius Caesar. And yes, in Christendom, these people were they knew they were not saints. Like they were not sainted. They knew they were pagans. But they were still, I don't want to say venerated, but remembered.
The 9 worthies. And that's what is the context of this 9 worthies? So what is that? Is that in Christian art?
So it's like medieval. Yes, so they actually go into that a little bit. They're in, I can't remember the name of it, but they show the picture. There's the saints in the outside of this. I think it's a cathedral. Or maybe it's the Commerce Building. I think it maybe had to do with more political rather than spiritual. So like there's some saints on like the either on the building or on the fence, like the gates around the building, statues of them. There's some saints, and then there's the nine worthies on the, and so, and as we know, outside matters, it depends. So that's okay. So you're asking me what I learned. So you is it a church? Is it a civic building in medieval Europe or Renaissance Europe or like whatever? Oh shoot, my son's school's calling. Sorry, he has diabetes, so I need to double check.
That's all right.
Whatever. I just need to answer it for just a second. Sorry.
That's good.
Hello? Hi, Mommy. I'm at 11.1. Okay, you can tell them they can give you half a unit of the red, okay? Okay, bye. Okay, bye. It was my son. Hi, Mommy. Can you tell me what insulin I should have? Anyway, sorry about that moment. It was actually quite quick, so that's good. Quick interruption. So anyway, so the where was I? Okay, about the different. It matters where
you were talking about the
things
nine.
Are placed.
Was
the
it
nine words?
The nine
yeah,
words?
But when it comes to where things are placed, what type of building? Is it some images on the gatehouse? Is it images on the gates? Is it images on the outside? Is it images on the inside?
Right.
It matters.
Like gargoyles and stuff like that.
Right.
Because we have loads of gargoyles in like Canterbury on these little old crickety old streets, and then on the outside you've got these like demonic wood cuts into like the timber and stuff like that. And it's and obviously on the church buildings, because they're terrifying on those buildings. Like they're such amazing works of art of such grotesque. They're so grotesque and so like.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Go on. That's
no.
Where they
so,
are.
Well, it just shows. Okay, so I'm bringing up the specifics of like, I was just watching Peugeot and Roland's latest, but that's just an example of the latest of what's been sort of adding to my understanding, mostly of. Yeah, like the medieval period is like 500 between 500 and 1500. So, like understanding this idea of. People sort of, I've seen people tweet this, they find weird images of medieval art and they're like, this is supposed to be Christian, what the heck, or like, this is supposed to be like this is on the side of a church, church or like,
sure.
And people being like, or on the edges of a manuscript or, where it falls in the manuscript might also matter as well, and people, they choose the weirdest, of course they're going to choose the weirdest stuff to be like, because it's not interesting. Like, why would you tweet about like, this is a very like appropriate looking image in medieval, like, that's not shock factor.
But we mustn't forget that the medieval era was brutal in many respects, because I think there is an important movement of, how could I say it, like remembering the medieval era, this discarded image Lewis is talking about. I found it in my philosophical interest with Plotinus, Porphyry, Boethius is a big figure who is one of the important intellectuals at the beginning of the so-called medieval era. And there's a whole intellectual tradition, aesthetic tradition, the churches of Europe, like the way in which space and sound and all of these things are made holy and made to participate in worship or something like this. And I think all of that's really beautiful and important. I just also want to try to remember as I do that how short the lives were of people in the medieval era, how much their self-concept as citizens or whole persons with full dignity wasn't fully manifest politically, for example. And there's lots of things like that, but it's as an overall project, it's so enchanting, really, I think is the word I would use, to come into contact with this living tradition of beauty and truth and all of these things.
Well, okay, so that's good that you bring that up, because it has been so it has been such a negative, it's been such a negative, the medieval dark ages, the middle, well, it's the middle, it's like it's, you're trying to get like, oh yeah, the classics, the classical era, then there's that middle like dark bit, nothing much advanced, because that's apparently our standard of good is advancements. And again, not even necessarily true, but and then Renaissance, beautiful, wonderful. And again, I just was listening to this. According to Richard Rollins, medievalist or German philologist to be specific, but anyway, he said that the Renaissance were more bloody than the Middle Ages. So
more bloody,
more violent. Because
yeah,
you'd
that
was the days of good form. That was the days of you don't chivalry, you don't fight on certain days.
When was, sorry?
The Middle Ages.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, okay, that's true. I don't know, like the Renaissance it's like a rebirth of classical culture. Like
I know, but that's one of the things that I can't say to it because I just heard him mention it. Like, so he didn't go into why. So that'd be an interesting question. Is like, hey, why did you?
It was a bloody time for the last 2,000 years. I think I agree with Jordan Peterson about that.
Yeah.
As a general point, like savage compared to our contemporary sensibilities. And I think that's something that's striking in itself.
Oh, I know why. Reformation, religious wars.
Yeah. I mean,
there you
17th
go.
century,
a little bit more. I wonder if maybe that might be what he had in mind, because there was just like literally the Bloody Mary, the name of Queen Mary. She ruled for like less than a quarter of the time that Queen Elizabeth ruled, but she had the same number of people murdered who were like the opposite.
It'd be an awkward time to be Catholics. In England, a Catholic or a Protestant during those times. That'd be horrible.
So I imagine maybe that had to do with it. But anyway, the point is that I am just like, because we do have such the modern Enlightenment view, or Victorian view even, because Enlightenment, and then a lot of our view of the Enlightenment is actually through Victorian England. And how they view
it's possible, yeah. I think that's like John Stuart Mill.
It's colored through, and even like people calling and again, I'm not American, I'm Canadian, but calling the founding fathers atheists, and it's like, no. Like they may have been less Christian-ish than what you have a definition of a Christian would be, but it's not, whatever. Anyways, the point is, I just for me, I guess I don't want to get too rosy of, the medieval era was so much better than we've been told, and then I kind of whitewash like in my mind, like, oh, okay, so it's not like yeah. So I would risk that, because I am reframing it, because it has been in such a sort of a dark a period of where people stopped learning and they didn't know things. And thank heavens for the finding of Aristotle's works and all such things of that Renaissance, that rebirth, because man, they knew nothing in the middle. It's like, it wasn't dark though. It was different from what we think is dark, and everything had its place, mind you. I do think there's a reason why it broke down.
It is dark literally though, in terms of literature though, isn't it? I could be wrong on that, but like in terms of like the actual body of surviving literature from those years, let's go
surviving, right?
500 to 1500.
Yes.
Let's say those years. If I'm a historian and I'm going back into the literature of humanity, is it kind of literally dark in the sense of like pre-printing press, like it's monastic literacy really and scholasticism that preserves that literate culture, and then that explodes and universalizes around the mid 15th century, but like with the printing press and stuff. And so I'm just considering whether there is a case that to be said that it's dark, just in the sense that we don't have a whole load of records about writings from that time, but I guess we do have quite a lot, to be honest. We have like
Well, okay, I remember Lewis, Lewis said in the discarded image that apparently Chaucer is quoted as saying, "Why would anyone want to write about anything new?" So he's like, when we have such a wealth to go on. So it might be a perspective of new, we think as what we're imagining looking back is like, well, there's not much that's coming out, but perhaps to them, and I'm just like pulling out of like little bits that I recall of that book I read that one time of, C.S. Lewis. I'm not a scholar at all, but the idea that maybe they looked at the copyings and the reinterpretations of the different copiers, which they were okay with, like that's okay. No, don't worry about copyright. Don't worry about word for word. The idea is there. Maybe they're like, this is great. What do you mean there's no new stuff? Like, why would we need new stuff? Like, so that's just one reading of it. But it also could just be that we don't have it. And I think that I've heard that before. We don't have much. I'm talking about this as if I know anything. I really don't. It's just, I've just been talking with people, like you said, and on my channel about this.
It's a time that fascinates me too. And
we have a negative view of it. It's like, we don't know. It's like, we look at it as if it's not good, as if like we're so much better later.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know.
Well, I did anyway.
I guess for me in England, like the parish churches and stuff, often they'll be like Norman. They'll have like Norman foundations or something. So they'll like often like the local churches will have this like link, direct. Well, I'm from a medieval town, like in Faversham in North Kent. Like it's just a medieval town, and like
okay, so you have a bit of a connection, like in the literal
in my soul,
matter.
really. In my soul and in the liturgy of the town, and like just in the ancient feeling of the place, and like how the parish is just the spire for the whole town, and like it's just got an antiquity to the space really in the place. But my point is, that's also a place where beauty reveals itself to me in the liturgy of my youth as I grow up, go to school in the town, all these things. Like the church is like, and Canterbury Cathedral, which is quite it's like east of Faversham by a few miles. Canterbury was a pilgrim site in England during the medieval era too. So there's like these strong like medieval connections, I guess, with where I'm from. And I don't know, I was always struck with the nostalgia and the beauty to encounter an ancient sacred site like that. Like there's one called Reculver on the North Kent shore, and it's like you stand there, you're like, whoa, like, and that's my experience personally. There's a kind of way in which the beauty is evangelical, and the way in which like certain patterns of the way space is organized and aesthetics are organized is just like, it speaks to your heart so deeply. And for me, that was almost like, I don't think I ever called myself atheist. The worst I went to was agnostic. I was like, like, I don't know if God exists. I couldn't say. But I guess that there's like a seed sown in my heart from the beauty of all this medieval tradition, if you want to say.
I so envy you. That's so lovely.
No, I think that's really like an important thing, isn't it? Like the reality of beauty and culture, and the way our ancestors really cared to preserve it.
So that's kind of what Roland said at the end of our talk about the discarded image. It was a critique of his. It is almost not necessarily against what Lewis was saying, but you could almost not read the book and he was describing, I don't know if you've ever heard of these things called rood screens. I think it's ROOD. So it's basically in the nave of the church, of the Orthodox Church. And I don't know much about them. Like but you can look up photos, and it's all there.
They're barriers between the Holy of Holies and the congregation.
And it's a screen, so you can still see through it, but they've got all of these images, everything's, it's like, the sort of, he brought up, I think, like Pajot's sort of like mountain of everything, you know, the picture that he has of the mountain with everything in it.
Mm.
Look that up, because I don't, how
I
do I
love,
describe that?
yeah, no, I
Everything's in
love
it.
that image. Yeah.
Yes, so it's like that, but in, rather than in like a photo or a drawn photo, it's like it's the screen, it's around the
Hmm.
screen. And so what you're
Participating in
describing
the
to
religion.
me is, yes, sounds sort of like along the lines of, oh, I didn't necessarily know, but I knew. You know, you knew
Mm.
from like
With my
instincts
heart,
of it.
with my head, I
Mhm,
didn't. I suppose my head was
mhm,
in rebellion against my heart in some sense, because that's the
mm,
agnostic thing. Because the head is
mhm.
saying, "How could I know? Like, what evidence do I need to say that I know or couldn't know? Who, what human could
Right.
say that kind of thing?" And it's like, still to this day, there's a logic to that position. I'm like, yeah, there's some truth to that, like the limitations of human knowledge and stuff. But like,
Mhm,
it was just more of a, yeah, more of a heart thing. Um,
mm. No, it's interesting. Like the beauty spoke to your heart. I think, okay, so because I was thinking a little bit when you were describing about all the loveliness and the beauty, I'm like, why did I have a negative? But it wasn't like it's so bad. It just, but I think I had a sort of negative tinge to the medieval time. I think because people, you know, people always like to think that we're so much better now. And so
mhm.
that's sort of being perpetuated in the sort of uncleanliness. Oh, they didn't wash. Oh, they didn't like take baths. They like, you know, oh, Queen Elizabeth's makeup was caked up to here, apparently. Like what, you know, these rumors. Because she never washed her face, you know, whatever. And I think, and I've looked into these things since talking with these great people who are experts in this space. I've also been looking into vintage fashion, but like looking into really vintage fashion, really vintage, like okay, washing hair, okay, hair, like washing your hair, washing yourself in like 8 days gone by. The idea, I guess, the thing is, they weren't dumb. We like to think they were dumb. I think that that's something that a lot of people want to think that they were just backwards and didn't know a thing. Anyways, by people, I mean like, you know, the angry atheists, you know,
Sure,
those.
sure.
So because, you know, oh, Christian society, and then no, nothing, dummies. But okay, but they knew that.
I don't know. I feel like that's so rash to like. I
Okay,
mean,
but okay, but this is wrong. I think this is stuff that I've,
it's
again,
fair.
living in
It's
North
fair.
America,
It's
the
fair.
stuff that I'm not around anything old except for the mountains, you know. So I think that that sort of you know, and not even people necessarily teaching this, just comments from different people. Oh yeah, I heard that like they never washed, and like, you know, I just random like where what in my time of life are people like, you know, about the medievals? Like I don't know where this came from. It just, you know, it just through my life, just hearing things. And like I find out they knew that water could be bad for you, hence, you know, usually
Mm,
drinking watered down wine, much like they did in Jesus' day, and you know, for all of much of history.
mm,
So knowing, they knew that water could be diseased, unless you were someone, and I did hear this in like recently, unless you were someone who say worked like at a sewage type job, you knew that water was better than that, so you would wash because you're like, well, this is worse, so it, you know. But otherwise, you know, other than like freshwater springs and then, you know, like in the hillside, like people were just like, yeah, like in the cities and in like, it just, this water's not great, and so you just would sparingly. And with their hair, they would like brush it twice a day, the gals, and like then plait it and or braid it and put it up and put a little bonnet on. That would keep it clean. And so I
mm.
think that there's this sort of it could even just be the way things are worded, you know, in history books. They're not trying to. It's just a sort of, you know, I don't know, just a coloring of it, of you know, like just dark, just that, you know, they just didn't know things. And like
I think
but
fairy tales might be a
living in a
way.
place,
On fairy
what?
tales are on fairy tales are kind of way, or kind of like door back in, or like especially with like Disney's whole aesthetic of like the like castle thing, and like
You
the
know,
European lore of
yeah.
like fairy
Okay,
tale.
that's medieval feeling, right? No, I would say Lord of the
Mm.
Rings is like a huge, like,
Sure, sure.
they, but like it lifts it up, you know, for me anyways, that it
Mm.
definitely made that idyllic medieval, and that's how people read in nowadays with the rise of fantasy, thanks to Tolkien.
Hmm.
Thanks, Tolkien. Um, like thanks
It's
to
like a
him.
synthesis, isn't it? The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, we look back in our history, and I've heard again, I've heard, this is all things I've heard, nothing's original. I've heard it like, I think through, like, you know, one of some of these different fellas talks, how the medieval folk looked back at the classics.
Hmm.
That's how we look back at the medieval world, and we use those stories for us and how we interpret our origin stories, you know. um and the medieval world. That's why, when why is
But they
fantasy,
had a
that's the question,
tradition
why
back
is
to Rome,
fantasy?
right? So like
Hmm?
they had a tradition that goes back to Rome, right? That's what
But
I've
why
been
do they
learning
have that
from.
tradition back to Rome? Because they, everyone needs a story. Like, everyone needs that origin story. They came,
Uh-huh.
like, I don't, because they came up with it. That's where they're from. What are you talking about? It is Rome. Like, yeah, okay. But you know, myths come from, like, that's why they identify with the Trojans. Like, Rome was like, yeah, we're from the Trojans. That's why that's why, particularly in medieval England, it's Hector, not Achilles, because it's not Greek that they're identifying with. It's the Trojans. And why the Trojans? Because Rome came from the Trojans, and apparently Constantine's mother was British.
Yeah.
Helen was
Constantine was
British.
born in York, wasn't he? They've got a statue
I
of him.
think so. I don't. You have to look
His
back.
I think his father was garrisoned in York, and they've got a
Yeah, yeah. So
statue.
yeah, right. So there's this sort of like like, okay, so the, you know, Constantinople meets the fringes of the West, and you know that comes in. So anyway, yeah, I think that it's really interesting that you had this involved sort of the aesthetic of the medieval period shone through for you, that you were able to, you couldn't help it. You're like, "Okay, this is wondrous." So
Well, and
yeah, why wouldn't you look up to it?
let me say more broadly, I think it might be Christianity more specifically. Like, there's something about it's almost like Christianity had a monopoly on beautiful things. If I were to describe my whole life experience, I know it's a weird way to say it, but it's like if there's a song that's like the
Mhm.
highest of the highest song I could play, it's like a Christian liturgical song, or like Bach was inspired by all of that, and like there's just there's an angelic music, which to me is really just completely beyond and above popular music or any other form of contemporary form of music we have, and
Mhm.
like it's the same with architecture. Like it is the same with
Mm,
architecture. Living in
100%,
London,
yeah.
like all these new buildings in London that are coming up, like oh yeah, like just not even an order of magnitude close to
No, it's
the.
like, it's you gotta go in the minuses with the new buildings going up. It's horrible. They're horrible.
Yeah. Roger Scruton had this amazing documentary about beauty, and it's an hour long, and it's fantastic, and it's on YouTube. And he just goes around like kind of decrying the ugliness of different like building projects and just like talking about what beauty's meant throughout history. But yeah, like I think it's the medieval era, but I would almost say specifically the Christian, how can I say it, like the products of the Christian liturgy, the music, the architecture, the form of space and time, the way these things were sacralized and brought up, and the whole town seemed to have that as its heart, or like the way it was fundamentally structured. Um, I think that's all really, really powerful and potent. And so it's a strange
Mm,
position to be in terms of my faith, I guess, because I grew up basically secular in my head, you could say. Like
mhm.
in my head, I'm like secular. In my heart, like there's this deep religious feeling. And then
Huh.
it's like trying to get those in sync, or trying to kind of like recognize and acknowledge that, or something like that is how I felt about it.
So you grew up, your parents were just secular or agnostic, or
So my grandmother's really important. She's is Anglican and was like Anglican her whole life. Was a really important matriarchal figure within my family. and it's my mum's mum. But yeah, my mum is secular, new agey, I guess, spiritual, not religious. Is where she's at. But no, like we didn't have to go to church or anything. Like have to, but like that just wasn't part of our ritual. Let's say. I went to the local grammar school, which walks past the church every day, and there's like deep Christian formation there. So it's a really weird one for me because it's like it's just been this strange process of my like mind like slowly like kind of like acknowledging what's always been true, like the most beautiful things, most good things, the most noblest aspirations of the human spirit have come from the Christian faith, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I understand history. And like that's just really inspiring and like ennobling.
So looking at these the periods in which these like beautiful buildings and this architecture comes from, does that help inform sort of a connection between the heart and the mind sort of thing for you?
What do you mean?
Like you were talking about sort of like, you know, your head, your mind was secular, but your heart felt like drawn to the sacred.
Yeah.
So learning about the history of such things, does that help connect it at all?
You know, what I think has helped connect it is really it coming together in liturgy and prayer is like the best way I can say it. Like has been like, for me, they've been really powerful kind of spiritual experiences over the last few years of just like engaging in an Anglican liturgy and recognizing this as a living tradition that is deep in my soul and deeply who I am in some sense. There's a kind of homecoming thing to that, entering into sacred space and participating in liturgy and these kind of things. And so so those have been like really striking mystical or numinous moments for me, which kind of snap all of this stuff we're talking about together. And then it's just like, oh, I can always be participating in a story. What's the story? What's the God that's being worshipped? What's the story that's being told? What's the narrative? What's being prayed to? These kind of things. And I'm like deeply aware that like I'm always doing that every day liturgically, and it's like, okay, where's the true home? Where's true north? These kind of
things. I like that you brought up this story because that is actually what my main focus of my like YouTube journey and in who I select to speak to is the story. I felt like drawn to well, stories like you know, not like, you know, you can say the great story, but just story like narratives that have been around and what is ours.
Narratives can host us or they can reject us though, right? In a way is how I feel. Like you can participate in a narrative and it can chew you up and spit you out, or you can participate in a narrative and it brings you home and brings you somewhere true. I don't know, that's how I feel. Like,
I'm gonna bring us back to your original question.
Cool.
When you're mentioning about the idea of like, how do you know which of the pagan things, how do you know that you're not worshiping them? How can you appreciate them in the way you're supposed to? So I think, based on my talks and like thoughts just now, you know, I think that it's sort of the stories that, even if they're on the pagan side of things or not, I think that there's like you said about the true north thing, there's certain patterns. I'm going to just steal Pajot's words here. Certain patterns that manifest themselves over and over again in creation that we can't but help see. And sometimes we've lost our way, so you can't see them. But I think when you're on that path, like on them further up and further in sort of idea.
Okay. Yeah.
You can see the story. It's what you see when you
see the logos, the light.
Right. Or... Yes. In these Marvel films, there are certain things
I've never
that
watched them.
just, okay, well, shoot. Well,
Sorry.
whatever. Just what is, epic. Okay,
I
epic.
get it.
We'll
I get
even
it.
just
I get
say
it.
with Tolkien and
I get it totally. They constellate certain energies, don't they? Certain
it just
patterns.
clicks and you're like, this is right. This is worthy. This is, like going up, and it lifts you up and it brings you up. And there's things that are in paganism, I most of the time, a lot of the Christian ideals are not reflected in the pagan world, but sometimes they are, and we sort of
They must
we
have
notice
been, right?
them.
Yeah, because I've had this conversation with a few different people, and it's an important one because it's like, yeah, like how are pagan figures like Plato is an important figure for me, and for the whole of this tradition we're talking about.
Mm.
He's not Christian, is he? Like,
I
and
know.
he was writing
Well, like Socrates,
400
he's
years.
still like, it's such a similar sort of, like, I know he's way older, but that's sort of like, oh, because you're teaching truth, you're dangerous. You're corrupting the youth of Athens. So like,
There's a kind of
we're giving
logos
you a
thing
chance
there,
to leave. Yeah, like,
and it's his
I mean,
daemon as well, isn't it? His daemon is like spirit
right?
is
Yes,
telling him
yes.
his
Yeah,
inner
and
light.
Christ could
I
have
think.
left how many times, and he didn't, and so, it could sound blasphemous to compare Christ and Socrates, but actually C.S. Lewis does it. He talks about these echoes through time, so they go in the past and into the future.
Oh, that's
They
interesting.
echo, and it's on his book on the Psalms. He talks about the Psalms. I don't remember exactly what
That's
it's
a really
called.
beautiful way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, he uses this as an
Echoes backwards.
example. Yeah, it echoes backwards in, so that this is a precursor, to
So,
what's good. And so why do we look at, look at the Greeks thought that heroes were terrible but great, like they knew that they were dangerous and really terrible people. Like Hercules is the worst, like they're all like in the pantheon alone, they're all rapists. All the dudes are rapists. The girls, the women get horribly jealous. All this, whatever. They're terrible. But where am I going with this? Just saying how horrible and terrible these pantheons were. But oh yeah, but why is Socrates looked at? I don't know how how the ancient Greeks, I know Plato like looked at him in a veneration sort of way, like look at this man, look what he did.
philosophy is divided into the pre-Socratics and everyone after, right? So,
I mean, yeah, so there's a sort of even a shift there of like,
yeah.
Okay, maybe this is worthy. Maybe this behavior is more worthy than.
Well, he was arguably, I don't know enough about it, but he was engaging the polis, the city, through dialogos, and the Socratic spirit is like trust in the logos over established laws and customs and stuff like that, because it's the integrating principle that's updating our knowledge of what these things are. And he goes around and asks everyone who are supposed to know certain things, like, "Oh, do you know this? How do you know this?" Like really like humbly asking and then just like deconstructing everyone. He'd be so annoying to talk to. Like
it would be. Like no, it's a kid be like, but why? Okay, but then why? But then
like,
why?
shut up,
and then why?
Like but like that whole I think the idea in like the history of ideas is that he's exemplifying and embodying a participative spirit there that's novel in some important way and distinct from his predecessors. And Plato's dialogues are all written in terms of dialogue, so they're trying to model that spirit. I think that Socratic spirit.
Have you heard this? I've heard a story on. Have you heard of John Vervaeke?
Yeah, sure.
So he in his Meaning Crisis series, he talks about the whole story about like I hadn't heard it before about, he comes, that sort of the only thing I know is that I know nothing. So I've heard that quote, but I didn't understand it until I heard the whole story. And like, I'm just going to say it, even if you've heard it. I'm not even letting you answer if you've heard it or not, but I'm just going to just gonna say it. So you can tell me if you have heard it. So I guess that Socrates' friends went to the oracle at Delphi. Have you heard this?
Yeah, go on.
I'm just gonna keep
it.
going. I'll just keep going. So I've heard that. So they went to the oracle at Delphi and like to kind of like, I
To
don't
ask
remember.
her who's the wisest in Athens, right?
Yeah,
Who's
they
the
weren't trying
wisest
to
in
like,
Athens?
yeah. He was the one. Yeah. They weren't doing it earnestly. Like they were kind of like up to no good in a way. Like, they weren't like seeking like counsel from the oracle. Like, who's the wisest in Athens? And then
It's like
she
as
says,
it is, yeah.
yeah. And she says Socrates. And this is, mind you, and you probably know this, but for anyone who doesn't, the oracles never gave straight answers because they had to have leeway in case they were wrong. So it could always be interpreted in a way.
Well, Socrates is a question. So, like, in a way, his whole existence is a question. This is what Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish existentialist, picks up on in his love for Socrates. Like, Socrates is a question to Athens. Like, his very being is a question to the deepest ideals of the reigning political culture. And therefore his very existence is an anomaly, as Jordan Peterson would call it, to the prevailing cultural system, and thus has to be
But it was an anomaly to himself
sacrificed.
Almost, because he was like, wait,
Well,
I know.
the only thing he knows is that he knows nothing, right? So it's
I know,
like,
but you're skipping ahead. No.
But there's this question mark thing on him. And so, like, in terms of like opposites in being, like if the oracle at Delphi is usually this prophetic seer, and like she's like giving all like these kind of vagueness
She's
to
always
answers.
vague.
He is the exception because he is the question. If you see what I'm saying.
Okay,
So
but you skipped ahead.
If she's like the mirror, if she's like the mirror of him, then she gives like a real certainty.
And then she kind of inverted it. Yeah, okay, but I'm gonna finish my story, even though you skipped ahead. So that's okay. Right. Your podcast, you get to skip ahead, I suppose. So or YouTube channel, I don't know what you do, regardless. So anyways, so he's like, I know I'm not the wisest. That can't be true.
Notice the humility, because I think that's a common virtue that Christ and Socrates share, I think.
Yes.
And I think that's something important to underline there.
And he's honestly like, I honestly am like, there's no way I'm the wisest. But I do believe that the gods are not liars, which is funny because I'm like, well, how do you know that? But he believed that the gods wouldn't lie. So, because I'm like, pretty sure Zeus lied all the time to his wife where he was, but okay. But he's going off of the god. I don't believe the gods are liars, but I also don't believe that I'm the wisest. And that's where he comes to that conclusion. It isn't, I know that I know nothing. That's actually not a good interpretation. That's not a good translation from what I think was said, that Vervaeke said. It's, I know what I don't know. That's how I'm the wisest. That's how he reconciles. That's how he squares that circle is, I know, I ask questions because I'm aware of what I don't know. I'm very honest with what I don't know.
The way I see that is literally in terms of a chain of being, like, Peugeot's mountain. I just literally see it that way. Like, humility is an attitude of looking up, because it means like you are lower in your knowledge than what is needed here.
The ideal.
Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. And so that's a posture, that's an attitude really of humility. Humilitas is like, I think it's associated with like being on the ground, but it's like being like lower. And then the opposite of that is just looking the other way. We're looking down on the topic, where you are the authority on the topic, and therefore there's nothing higher than your authority on the topic. And that is a spirit of arrogance or pride.
Right.
And that's very, very important, I think, those two things. And it's a relationship thing, because you're in relationship to truth or like a god or a higher spirit. Socrates is daemon, maybe. You're in relationship to that. And that's an eternal unfolding mystery, and always is revealing new truths to you, etc. Do you see what I'm saying? Whereas you can not be in relationship to that.
But it's hard though, if you are in that space of I know what I don't know, because it sounds nice to be like, yeah, that's really like a virtuous space to be in. But it's hard because you feel like, oh, but
But
I
I
really
feel
feel
like
like I don't know
children just,
anything.
I feel like children and all of us when
Yeah,
we
that's
grow
right.
up
It
as
is
humans
great.
have that attitude. Or maybe I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
but when you're an adult, you're like weighed down with the understanding more. Because when you're a kid, you are like, I don't know anything, and that's okay.
That's why
When
Christ
you're an
says,
adult, it almost seems like you're
only
supposed to
those that
know.
become as children can come into the kingdom.
Well, there's that answer. There you go.
I,
As a
I really, I really,
massive
I really do
answer.
think that. I really do
Yeah.
think that, because I think there is like an openness and a not knowing of what you don't. What did you say? Not knowing what you don't know, like, or knowing what you don't
No,
know.
knowing what you don't know.
Mm,
Right? Because if
yeah,
you don't know what you don't know, that's where I've seen this Dunning-Kruger effect little chart where there's like you learn a little bit about a topic and then that's Mount Stupid, like they call it Mount Stupid, and then there's down into the pit of despair, and then there's a slow rise up to guru, which I'm like there's not that many people who actually rise up to guru, um because people the one this one fella I interviewed, he's like, do make sure don't like in your intro, like don't call me an expert on Aristotle, because he's doing his PhD, he finished his PhD on the Aristotle's view of poetry, and he's like there's like a drop, there's like a square inch that I am an expert in
yeah, yeah,
a sea of Aristotle. And so
yeah,
that's the thing, is like he's like, even for him, he's like, I barely know Aristotle in general, but
yeah,
this little
yeah.
tiny little
Oh
piece.
God, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
I've
the
just,
people
I've
who
just started
actually
my
get to
PhD
guru, I'm
this
like, no
month.
one.
I just
Mhm.
started my PhD this month, and like the first conversation I had with my supervisor was all about like literally, I was like, I just feel like I'm spiraling into new domains of complexity each time I pick up a book. And he's like,
Mhm.
yeah, like that will not stop. Like that's what
So
research
what are you
is.
doing your PhD in?
Oh, religion and theology at the University of Bristol. So it's like philosophy of religion. Um,
Hmm.
and in particular, I'm taking
Really
on.
light reading. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've got
I
being
see
in time,
this
all
stack,
this
this
stuff.
stack of books beside you. Real light reading. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? It's actually quite clear. Like I've been having a look at Being in Time, Heidegger, and I thought like I've always been a bit intimidated by that book, but it's the first few pages are all right. But I think like um, what my point was yeah, it's the same with the philosophy of religion. It's the same with all these different fields. Like each, I'm trying to understand the problem of universals. I'm trying to understand Plato's philosophy. There's all these interconnected things in my research area, and I guess it's just about learning when to just say like I can't spend my whole life devoted to that area of research. What is my area of research?
Mhm.
And what perspective can I bring to this? But no, like I'm acutely aware of how much I don't know, and that's the thing of getting all new books and stuff. Like I can never have enough books.
Well, that's one of the things I actually sort of am confused about when it comes to like sort of intellectuals. Like, I guess that's pretty broad. People who have done further studies past, even just past your bachelor's, like so masters and PhD, people getting like high on what they know. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm like, how can you even think that you know when you see how much you don't know in your pursuit? Like it
Yeah.
sort of seems, because people can kind of be like, oh, well, like maybe you wouldn't understand. It's like too deep, that sort of intellectual, like, no.
Well, the
I
thing
don't, and
is
I'm
that
like, how are you
Andrea,
not
my
all humbled?
experience, yeah, no, Andrea, my experience has been every time you read a mind, like a genius mind or a quality mind, and you read the writing of them, it's like you are humbled if you're trying to understand it. In my experience, because like
Yeah.
you can't read it and you can't make anything of it unless you are humbled and approach it slowly with humility. Like Jung was the first person who had that effect on me reading his collected works. It was just like I'm in the presence of a mind so deep and far seeing here, and like all I can do is humbly try to understand a little bit of what he's saying, like, and then like maybe come back to it. And it's the same with all the other authors, because such is the case with important things. I think that they always have more to reveal to you than you can really fully take in, like a beautiful work of art or a song and things like this. There's always more to be revealed, I think, anyway.
Right. Well, maybe it's just people I see, maybe it's just intellectuals I see on Twitter that have really big followings. So they're like, that's right. I do know a thing or two and I deserve all these followers. So maybe it's a mix of like the fame kind of mixed in, like.
Yeah. Well, the social media things, it is a, do I want to say it's a danger? I don't know if that's quite the right word, but maybe it is the word. But like the whole idea of
a potential pitfall.
Well, the whole thing of like veneration, right? It's like, it is veneration, like a like and a comment and stuff like this. It's like, it's veneration. And I've thought a lot about the idea of cults, and because cult is actually a legitimate liturgical sanctifying rite within Christianity, as far as I understand it. There's like a cult of, there's like the cult of the Virgin, or a veneration cult, like it's a pattern of devotion is what cult means. And what Jordan Peterson's talks about with imitation and mimesis, or like pattern copying, like when we see like people who are exemplifying really cool patterns, we like venerate it, like, oh, that's cool, like keep doing that, like go whatever it is you're doing. And that's just like natural human beings. But then like I feel like social media it just is just like another microcosm of that kind of pattern. And it is another question of like, what's higher, like, am I related to what's higher? And that is the question, really. Am I related to what's higher or not? Because if not, then I set myself up as the authority, and I have a kind of hubristic spirit in doing my things. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, that's interesting that you sort of give likes and like shares like in positive ways. Like these things are venerations, and I didn't think about it that way, but it resonates though, like it is.
So it's like a temptation, right, to accept that this is literally the pattern of a demon or an angel. As far as I can understand, I've thought a lot about demons, but like the demon is the one that's literally going, take it all onto me. Yes, I am worthy of all of this.
I'm a stop sign where the veneration ends, as opposed to like no, keep going up. The signpost pointing up.
You like block the flow of love, is a way you could put it. You block the flow of love instead of actually knowing that truth, goodness, and beauty, and anything wholesome that comes out of our creative enterprises, they have their ontological root in God. Yeah, like that's where their ontology is grounded. And so like the direct,
so hard if you don't believe in something, that anything that's above or below, like
but it's a liturgical or practical pattern, because like if you how did you say it, you like put a stopper in, like how if you block
the stop sign versus like a keep going up.
Stop sign. If you do the stop sign, then that pattern doesn't work. I think even independent of any religious or theological belief systems, I just think pride goeth before the fall, and like you will find
that's pretty accepted. You're right. In
the due course of time, you'll figure that out. Painfully, maybe. You know.
But how do you pass it on up if you don't think there's anything above?
Prayer.
That's the part that no, that's the part that I'm like, okay, the pride comes before a fall. People will like, that I'd agree to that. You know, people who take the worship, you know, who are like on the celebrity scale or even in a miniature version, people would be like, no, you shouldn't take that. That's not healthy. But how do you pass it up if you don't?
I think Jordan Peterson helped me to understand that as well, because he helped me to understand sacrifice and the very proximal idea that all you needed to do is start by considering that your mother and father gave birth to you and then sacrificed whatsoever to raise you and love you. And like that there are roads and shops, and all of the cultural structure is managed by like the labor of people, ancestors and people and energy, and all of these benefits that you reap from it. That is all, for Peterson, that's just built by your ancestors, which it is in a sense, if you include your
Oh,
parents
I see
as
a
ancestors.
gratitude for
Oh yeah,
the
yeah.
past.
But that's like a stepping stone, right? Because if you start with like the most local one, like mum or dad, and you can go like, if you can do that though, because this is the adolescent rebellion. Actually, it's like the adolescent rebellion is like, actually sever myself from that authority, sever
Right.
myself from that,
Yeah.
cut it, like that's the establishment, etc. And that's a phase in development, I think, and there's a critical juncture in maturity there, because do you go, oh no, actually I'm grateful for mum or dad's sacrifices, and actually why they sacrificed that, what kind of fruits I should bring to bear as a result of those sacrifices, what kind of duties are incumbent upon me and responsibilities because of the great weight of this sacrifice. Anyway, so I'm just saying, I think those are steps on a ladder towards the ultimate, the God of Israel sacrificing himself for all time.
Right.
That's,
Yes.
that's
Right.
good
Right. Yeah. And that's what I was mentioning about these patterns manifesting in the small and then in the large, in these mini stories, and then the meta story. It's the same story. It's the same story. Like it is like the and I've just recently read, I think I mentioned this to you the other day, Tom Holland's Dominion, and sort of swimming in Christian really waters. It's the sacrifice. I mean, I'm gonna, you haven't watched, do you mind if I spoil some of the Avengers movies?
Sure, I'm not gonna watch them.
I feel bad. I don't, okay, well,
don't feel bad, because I'm not
so you're aware of them.
Yeah.
I mean, you're like I've been living under a rock, but
sure.
I haven't been watching them either. So there, it's Tony Stark. He starts off as like, the chauvinistic playboy jerk douchebag dude, in the beginning, but ultimately in the end, he sacrifices himself for the big problem that they're solving, for humanity.
Becomes the scapegoat, right?
He snapped his fingers. That's the thing. He does the thing with the Infinity Stones that half of the universe has been wiped out. He gets a hold of these things in the midst of the battle, but he's mortal. So the power ultimately, and I've actually heard it said he had to die, because if he didn't die, then he would have these beyond powerful stones, and then you can only become a tyrant if you hold these, so that's
it's like Harry Potter as well, because I did this whole video on my YouTube a while back about the symbolism of Harry Potter based on Genesis 3:15, I think it's called the Proto-Evangelium, and it's basically the scene in the Genesis story where like Adam and Eve have sinned, been cast out of the garden, and it's kind of like on their way out, the serpent, God like says a prophecy, and he's like, the serpent will basically, someone will come from the line of Eve. So it's like someone will rise up from the line of Eve, and you will bruise its heel and he will crush your head. And I thought of that scene, that like iconic, that symbolic scene, and that is my hypothesis anyway in the video. That is the seed to the whole narrative of Harry Potter, because Lily Potter is like the Eve image. Harry's the seed of Eve. Harry's the one prophesied to overcome the serpent, because Voldemort is a serpent. Visually, like he is just a serpent, like he is a serpent. But then there's this whole power thing of like, oh, Harry, you could be great, you could be in Slytherin, you can talk to snakes. So he's got like this satanic, demonic like temptation here. But then
I see the temptations in the desert.
Totally. But then also like Harry,
you could be this,
you could be great, and like the Sorting Hat tells that to him, Voldemort tells that to him, and the thing is, it's true, Andrea. He could be great. He could be the greatest profane, or like, profane magician that ever existed. with the Elder Wand and like the Deathly Hallows that are accumulated.
Right. If you
like,
get salt, he had all the he had access.
He had all the power of magic, but she's saying that it's a deep magic. She's telling you what magic is, because he basically becomes a muggle. He like lays down all these garments of skin. He's accumulated all these garments, and he realizes, because Dumbledore did it for him. Dumbledore poured out his life in agapic love. But before Dumbledore, who's the prototype of all of this? Lily Potter, whose agape love is the sword that slays the snake. As like it's like the motif at the beginning of the whole narrative is like her agape is the sword and shield for Harry in a way. And like I
gotta watch this video of yours. I'm like, oh, chills.
Because that's Lily, that's her agape, that comes down. And then you've got Snape, who participates in that, and Dumbledore. They both pour out their lives in the narrative. And Dumbledore's like, the divine masculine or like head of Hogwarts. He's the top principal, and it all descends into chaos after he does that. But it's this agapic outpouring, because they've established this like holy line of which Harry is supposed to kind of like fulfill, and does through this agapic outpouring, which ultimately subverts evil.
So there could have been, you could have had great earthly power, but ultimately what is better is lowering yourself to the bottom of the hierarchy to then be lifted up.
That's the great power and the great magic. If I want to put it provocatively,
if we're going to be like, let's just go, like I've been bringing up Lewis, like the deep magic.
It is Lewis's deep magic. It's the same idea, because I used to watch, my nan used to play to us C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe from like the 90s or the 80s on the BBC.
Oh, I remember.
Do you remember it? Yeah. Oh God, I love that. We watched it on VHS at my nan's house. And deep magic, it's that. It's the deep magic. It's Aslan's deep magic. It's Aslan's deep magic is the deep magic. And this is more than a symbolic poetic idea. It has political efficacy and force. That's what Tom Holland's convinced me of. And other historians, like, there is real power. Like, it's just true. Like, that narrative is like a profoundly deep and rich symbolic narrative, but it is literally also true. Because if you do, evil is overcome in that way. Like, and
that's why it is revolutionary, and that's why I know that Pajot's put out a video like Christianity isn't revolutionary, but like it's game changing, I should say. Like the pagan world, and if you watch Lord of Spirits, which you do, right, or listen to Lord of Spirits,
I do. Listen.
Yeah. So if we listen to Lord of Spirits, we hear that the pagan world is ruled by pantheons of demons. Then Christ comes, although not then, like we have the light of the world, as in the chosen people, and through them comes Christ, and then he defeats sin and death, and now they're on like a sort of terror rampage. Well, we're not ruling anymore, but we're gonna light as much stuff on fire as we can as we leave. So, but that's why we see that sacrificial hero as like, that's the best you can do, and you can't do better than that in a story. That's why that's the best, because we all know in our swimming in our Christian waters that you can't get better than that, and that is what defeats evil. It's like, well, what does good mean? It's like, oh, good, like fighting to get rid of them. It's like, it's good. There's some fighting, but it's more it's like
it is that sacrificial lamb thing.
Letting it down, laying down your arms, like you said, like fighting, fighting in a way, in a peace, like with peace. You use the peace to subvert it, like flipping hierarchies.
Definitely,
getting into it, man. And this is so hard to learn, because it's stuff that you know without knowing. Like, it's stuff that you've seen all your life. It's these stories, these tropes you've seen. And then you hear Pajot use these words talking about the patterns. And I remember I didn't get what symbolism even meaned. I'm one of my kids. I don't even know what it meaned. my kids talk like this meant, I didn't even know what it meant for like a year. Like really, because it's so hard to grasp. And that's why we talk about in the Meaning of Icons book club, which we're actually missing right now. We've talked about, we read that. Yeah, we read that in Vladimir Lossky's little intro to that book, The Meaning of Icons. He talks about how when you articulate, when you put words to the symbolic, it kind of takes away some of it. When like you need to participate in it. You need to, like what you were saying about the liturgy, participation is, but if you go on explaining it and pick it apart, it can diminish. But how else are you supposed to understand things? So that's what Pajot says. He's like, I know what I'm doing.
This is what I was going to say. This loops to our earlier conversation about the Middle Ages and the medieval era, because maybe they weren't very literate, and it was dark in the sense of there wasn't much literature.
True,
but they were participating in the symbolic liturgy in a way that maybe
they went to church all the time.
Yeah, because post that era, it's all just everyone gets literate. There's a universal impulse towards this literacy. And,
the printing press and everything's much easier to become distributed. And yes,
literacy and liturgy, I guess, is the difference.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, nice little alliteration there.
Yeah, that's a good one.
You're like, I'm gonna work that into my PhD somehow. No, I'm just kidding.
But then, there's something to that, becoming a bit abstracted through books and stuff and just forgetting to participate.
But I have really deeply enjoyed, even though I know that there's a little bit lost in putting words to the abstract, but I really have enjoyed that part of like this part of my life of tuning into certain YouTubers or podcasters or like, experts in this space. I do want to like exist in the participatory, but I also, there's something that is gained by understanding why we do
I agree.
the things we do.
I wholeheartedly agree.
I can see what they're talking about, what's lost if you never participate. But like if you do both, I think that can be like a healthy sort of balance. But I've really enjoyed learning these things. That's why I really have enjoyed learning about the medieval era, because so much tradition and like liturgy and like feast days, fast days, like the holy calendar, everyone doing it together, and I'm really idealizing it. There's a lot of rough parts. Like it was rough being a peasant in that time. I'm sure. But I also bet that there were certain pockets with certain towns where maybe it did go really well together. And that's another thing is people just, they bought into the model until they didn't, until Martin Luther comes along. And it's not
Andrea,
just Luther.
at the heart of this is something really important, though, I think, is, the Renaissance births humanism and then the birth of individuality, really. You get this, you start to get this educated, literate, self-reflective.
Well, what do I think? What do I think? What am I convicted of? Yeah.
Well, exactly. And then you get, what do we think as women, as people of the French revolutionaries? You get the people, the populist movements, this consciousness, class consciousness is, I guess, what Marx would call it. The class consciousness of the power of words, the power of education, the power of having more money from the Industrial Revolution, of actually being able to, our labor, our money, it has value. All of this. My point is that the whole political consciousness of the individual, which we have and have inherited, is an Enlightenment or post-Renaissance contribution. And there's a tension there. There's a real tension there, especially in the stuff from Pajot, which I completely love. But then I guess the difference between Pajot and Peterson is this tension too, in a way. The individual, where does the individual stand? What is the individual? Because Peterson, insofar as he's articulating a defense of the individual, necessarily draws on Enlightenment tradition and post-Renaissance tradition. And Pajot's, in articulating the medieval model, isn't so committed to any of those things, and maybe would be skeptical about them as movements in general. maybe. I don't know if you go that far, but
Well,
but there's a
submitting to tradition, which is like, the collective tradition of those who came
sorry,
before you.
what did you say?
So submitting to the collective tradition of what came before you. That's a sort of a kind of collectivist,
Sure,
like not
but then where
my
does
own
innovation
thoughts.
stand on that? Where does the germ theory of disease stand in that? Which just seems like a
No,
good
I know.
scientific
I'm a big
thing.
fan of individualism is the thing, but
Same. Like,
I'm a
but
big
then
fan
how
of
do you reconcile that
it as
commitment?
well. What do we miss? What is missed in the midst of this? Yay, the individual! Like, well, a lot is missed,
Yeah, yeah,
right? So, like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
appreciate that I could
yeah.
choose my spouse. That's like direct result of like the movement towards individualism. I'm not
But it's also
concerned about
grounded in the
like,
doctrine of the free will, right? And
yeah,
romantic love and all these similar notions that
but that's all individualistic, isn't it?
deeply, yeah, and
Yeah,
deeply Christian, I'd say. I'd
yeah.
I'm reading a book about the political philosophy of it and how the monks preserved this. Augustine, in particular, I think it was, talks about free will, and free will
Mm,
is so connected to love and
mm,
our sense of romance. Like, something in my soul is choosing this other person truly freely, and that is a very unique conception of love, I think, and one that is I think is a Christian inheritance, really.
mm. Well, I mean, it was always a business transaction. Well, because women were like, let's make some treaties. You can marry my daughter.
Yeah, women weren't persons in the Roman Empire, though.
Right. No, it's
So
horrible. It's so horrible. That's one of the things that is so interesting. The more I like listen to history podcasts, such as The Rest is History, which is my favorite.
so good.
Learning about like the Sparta episode, learning that
Yeah,
like it's
yeah.
actually not too bad being a woman in Sparta. It would suck being a woman in Athens,
Well, it would
but
suck
it's
being a
not too
child
bad
in
in
Sparta.
Sparta.
It would suck being a child in
Oh,
Sparta.
right. Yeah, I know. And that's the thing is like it, or being a helot in Sparta, because then you'd be enslaved. Like, so yeah, like there's different parts where that's kind of, I never would have guessed that it would have been in Sparta that women would have more rights,
I didn't know
but they
that.
did.
Did they?
Well,
Yeah.
that's what Tom Holland said.
Well, that's interesting. But I
Yeah,
mean,
apparently they would have the young boys, like not young, the adolescent boys, like stand in a line naked and have the girls, like from the class or whatever, come out and like ridicule them, like building character.
fruit,
Anyways, just saying,
brutal
but I don't know,
Spartans.
Spartan women
Spartans were
were
hard.
like seen as, I think, more as
No, I
persons
think you're right. I think you are right.
than
Yeah,
in Athens. And
I
then I
think you're
guess
right.
even in Rome, it was even worse for women.
But look, look. I think where I go with Sparta is straight to the deformed children, because like they're leaving them outside to die, and
Yeah.
like that's radically different. Like, and I can even give you the women in Sparta. It's like, okay, even if they did have,
Yeah, no, oh
and
no, there's
even
nothing redeemable. Yeah, you're right. It's not redeemable just
no,
because
but it's an interesting observation, because
yeah,
we had a Boudicca, or no, Boudica.
yeah,
Boudica was like an Iceni tribeswoman who stormed
yeah.
Londinium against the Romans and stuff. So, yeah, there's all like,
No, she's
yeah,
an interesting, I remember because they talk about her a lot on The Rest is History. Because
it's
she's
great.
a statue. She's one of the female statues in wherever your statues are in London that are like the
Oh,
main
near Big Ben, yeah,
square.
just
Yeah. So
Westminster.
the funny thing is that like she represents anti-empire, but then at the same time, like yay
Yeah.
empire. Like there's literally two plaques,
Oh
and one is
yeah,
like
that's a good point.
down with empire, and then the other one is like yeah empire. Like it's like sort of like
That's a
look at
fascinating point.
her.
Yeah,
Yeah, because she's like anti-Rome. She's the epitome of like
she's
fighting against
Britannia though.
Rome.
She's the spirit.
But
She
then the
becomes the spirit
British
of Britannia.
Empire. It's like a paradox. It's like she's sort of this interesting paradoxical character in British history. But I think I'm gonna go get lunch soon and check on
Oh,
my
cool.
world.
Yeah,
And I
cool.
kind of want to pop in to see if anyone's around on the symbolic world group because I missed it 2 weeks ago. And I try to let me see. Oh, no one's there. Oh, you and I should have been there. Shoot, it was my bad. I chose the time. But oh well.
Ah,
We
it'll
don't
go
have to go
next
to a
time.
second, but is there anything for wrapping up?
I know we get.
I did. You said
That
you
is a good
mentioned
chat. That's a
Tolkien.
good
I
chat.
feel like you mentioned Tolkien. I don't.
Oh yeah, yeah, I
Why did
definitely
you
did.
bring him
Yeah.
up?
Oh, just because like he's just another example of that thing I was saying about beauty. Like my mum read The Hobbit to me at 7. It was the first book I read, and it was a really special story to her because her sister, my aunt, and basically passed away a while ago, and she was really into Tolkien, and that was all during the 50s when Tolkien was writing. And there's this real like English tradition of like love for the stories, if you know what I'm saying, and like
Mm-hmm.
because they are beautiful magical stories, and like anyway, they've always had a place in my heart. And then like in our family, we'll watch them together. It's a really an amazing mythos, and oh, I've just like started reading like his on fairy stories and just getting the fact that this Tolkien is just like his incredible genius, incredible mind, and he knew absolutely coherently what he was doing, and
Mm-hmm.
he was inspiring the heart towards beauty and the transcendent. Like I was saying with Christian music or Christian architecture, he was doing that in narrative because it's the same thing. He's in a category of his own in terms of contemporary
He
narrative.
created a genre,
Yeah,
fantasy,
yeah, yeah,
epic
yeah,
fantasy,
yeah,
right? Because it's different from fairy
yeah.
tale. So I
He,
okay. Well, I've been listening to the Amansul podcast. Have you heard of that one? It's Richard
mhm,
Rowland guest hosts a lot.
sure.
Actually, no, he doesn't guest host. He's technically like the co-host with Father
Yeah,
Andrew. They kind of alternate.
it's really good.
And so that looks through they call it the Tolkien Legendarium. So going outside of my little hold on one second. Hi. Okay, I'll be done in 5 minutes. Okay, buddy. I'm just finishing up. Okay. He's wearing a raccoon costume. He just like comes in. Anyway, I will wrap up with this. So okay, so I've been listening to this, and then I've read the Silmarillion once, but it was in high school, and it's been a while. And like, well, I've read The Hobbit. I read like the Lord of the Rings, and I read the Silmarillion, and I have to read, but I haven't read the outer canon. So
Sure.
they look through the lesser known parts of the Tolkien legendarium, and so they go through a lot in the Silmarillion, but they also go through like the Fall of Gondolin and the Book of Lost Tales, and I think they call it. I can't remember the name of it, but it's the Fall of Numenor, the Akalabeth. That's what it's called. See, I only know this because I've listened to this like a lot, this podcast a lot. So that's stuff that I didn't even know. So I've been learning a lot about the background of Tolkien and Christopher Tolkien and what it took to put together the Silmarillion and put together these different bits and like just yeah. I mean, I learned a lot back in high school for me when the movies came out because I was like really into the movies. That was like grade 10, 11, 12 for me was the years that they came out, the three of them. So it was like my like older
Got you.
my older teenagehood. And my mom was trying to get me to read them for years, but she made them sound super boring the way that she was like, oh, they're so great because just his detailed like description of the countryside, and I'm just like, that sounds uber boring, so no thanks. I read The Hobbit in grade 7 because I had to for school, blah blah blah. It was cool, but like whatever.
I've not read the Lord of the Rings. I'm really
Oh,
embarrassed
okay.
about
Well,
that.
you'll need to. So I did, and so I read them with the movies, and it's like, oh, it's so amazing, and then like the Silmarillion, and then I kind of lost steam and didn't even really realize that there was more. But
The
so I've
first
read.
chapter of the Silmarillion is just mind blowing. The music of the Ainur is just it is
Oh, I
mind
know.
blowing. I
Well,
just
so
read
I'm
that.
just
I'm
gonna.
like this.
Well, I'm gonna leave with the thing that I learned because the little things that you learn that you because like there's a lot that I don't know, but then there's a lot that I'm like, oh yeah, I read that and I remember that. So one of the things that Tolkien, when he was writing the Silmarillion, particularly the bit about Melkor slash Morgoth
The
and
Discord of Melkor.
Sauron. Yeah, so he's writing the big baddies. So it's like Morgoth is the big baddie, and then Sauron is the little bit I would say the soothsaying more, in a way, more cunning baddie. He literally talks his way out of jail in Numenor. So I mean, you know, he convinces them like, oh, you should go to Valinor. Like, you're just as good as the Valar, you know, or whatever, as the Eldar and whatnot. So anyway, I one of the things that really struck me was Tolkien was like, I felt up to the task to write incarnated evil, but people, he's like, yes, I know that there are bits of a sort of Christ figure in Aragorn. You could say even in Gandalf. You could say
Frodo as well.
Frodo, yeah, in Frodo and
There's
Sam, and even
yeah.
Bilbo. You know, there's bits in these, but he's like, but I never would ever say this is like, this is like, you know how Aslan is Christ. In your world, I'm known by another name. So that's a direct. It's just super like it was like, honestly, I thought it was fine the way that Lewis did it.
What I
But
think is the hiddenness of God. Like I could be wrong about this, but I've thought a lot about Lewis and Tolkien, because Lewis has his Michael Ward, is it, who wrote Planet Narnia, about the seven heavens implicit in the scheme of Lewis's Seven Chronicles. But anyway, the point is, both of them had some kind of mystical understanding of the way hiddenness plays on our hearts, and like how the hidden and the subtle draws our hearts into a longing to be in this world. And I think that they both deeply understood that. And that's why Lewis didn't tell anyone about these parallels between the seven heavens in his stories, and maybe wasn't even doing it consciously, but this guy decoded those patterns within his imagination years later.
I have heard this, and I forgot about it, but they did it in very different ways. You know, like that's
totally,
what Tolkien,
of course, of course.
I would not ever deign to write the incarnation into my legendarium. I don't know if he called it a legendarium, but into his mythology. He felt up to the task for writing evil, incarnate evil in, but not like only hints, you know. And like there is religion in Lord of the Rings, no matter who says there's not. You know, literally when Gandalf talks to Frodo about something, there is something at work in why Bilbo found the ring. There is a, like, and I can't remember it word for word, but like it's like Frodo's like this chance he happened to find this, and then it's like, well, it may not have been chance, Frodo.
Pity is what stayed Bilbo's hand.
Yeah, so there's that, but this is in that same like bit where that's being discovered, this conversation. But it talks about how like there is work other than evil in this world, Frodo. And
that's the hope, you know, because
right.
I'm going to let you go, Andrea, because I know.
And so I know, and it never says the name Iluvatar in the Lord of the Rings, but he's alluded to. You know, he's like the good is alluded to, and so anyway. But yeah, I know. So now I'm like, oh, let me just quickly bring up Tolkien as if that was a good idea. But this is, yeah, I know my little one is like, mommy. But this was really a nice chat. I hope it was very random. I hope that, well, it's not random, but like not planned. I hope that it was what you were looking for. So.
Oh yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's just like, it's just shared interest, isn't it? There's a lot of fascinating stuff of what all these different people are saying and the reading and stuff. It's really nice like to talk it through.
And looking at things in the like, oh, that's resonating with me too. Like, oh yeah, me too. That's cool. Like, yeah, I like being able to see like the journeys of like, oh yeah, I'm resonating in this space as well. So yeah, no, that's good.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah, let's talk again at some point.
Yeah,
it was good talk.
Yeah,
Have
for
a good
sure.
day.
Yeah, we'll see you. Yeah, bye.
See you, Andrew.
Bye.